The stars had always called to humanity, and after 200 years of dreaming and building and reaching toward the endless black sky, they finally answered that call with ships of their own making. It began on Europa, the frozen moon of Jupiter, where a mining crew discovered something that would change everything: a crashed alien vessel buried beneath 3 kilometers of ancient ice. Its hull still intact after what scientists guessed was 10,000 years of waiting. The technology inside was beyond anything Earth had ever seen, and the greatest minds of every nation worked together for the first time in human history to understand it, to learn from it, to make it their own. 15 years later, the first human faster-than-light vessel punched through the fabric of space itself and emerged in a star system 40 light-years from home. And when the crew looked out at those alien suns, they wept with joy and wonder and the knowledge that nothing would ever be. The same ambassador, Elena Vasquez, remembered that day well because she had been a young woman then, fresh from university, and filled with dreams of peaceful contact with beings from other worlds. Now she stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel, Hope of Terra, as it approached a massive space station that hung like a metal flower in the void between stars. And her heart beat fast with excitement and just a little fear. This was the Nexus, the center of galactic civilization, home to the Galactic Council that had ruled the Orion Arm for 50,000 years. The 4 humans had even learned to make fire. 12 species sat on that council, beings so old and so powerful that they had seen empires rise and fall like waves upon a cosmic shore. And today they would meet humanity for the first time. Elena straightened her formal uniform and took a deep breath as the ship docked with a gentle thud that she felt through the floor beneath her feet. Captain Marcus Webb, a tall man with gray at his temples and kind eyes that had seen too much of war, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You ready for this, Ambassador?" he asked in his quiet way. Elena nodded, even though she was not entirely sure that was true. But she had spent her whole life preparing for this moment, studying languages and cultures and the art of bringing different peoples together. And she would not fail now. An airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and Elena walked forward into a corridor that seemed to stretch forever, its walls made of some material that shifted colors like oil on water. Alien guards stood at attention, tall insectoid beings with 4 arms and eyes that reflected light like black mirrors, and they led the human delegation through passages that twisted and turned until Elena lost all sense of direction. Finally, they emerged into the grand chamber, and Elena had to stop herself from gasping out loud at what she saw. The room was vast beyond anything she had imagined, a dome of crystal and light that seemed to contain the stars themselves, with 12 massive thrones arranged in a semicircle, and beings upon those thrones that made her feel very small and very young. The Volanti were there, their serpentine bodies coiled upon cushions of silk, their scales shimmering with colors that had no names in any human language. The Korthaks sat rigid and proud, their stone-like faces impossible to read, their 4 eyes watching everything with ancient patience. The Mindari floated in tanks of purple liquid, their tentacles drifting like seaweed, their telepathic voices already pressing against the edges of Elena's thoughts. And there were 9 others, each more strange and wonderful than the last, and all of them looked down at the small group of humans with expressions that ranged from curiosity to contempt to something that might have been hunger. The eldest of them spoke first, a Volanti whose scales had faded to silver with age, her voice like music and thunder combined. "So these are the humans," she said, and Elena heard amusement in those words. The kind of amusement a grown adult might feel when watching a child try to walk for the first time. "They have come far for such a young species." Elena stepped forward and bowed in the manner she had practiced 1,000 times, showing respect without submission, confidence without arrogance. "Honored Council," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Humanity comes before you not as conquerors or beggars, but as seekers of friendship and knowledge. We wish only to take our place among the stars as partners and allies in the great work of civilization." Silence followed her words, and Elena could feel the weight of those alien eyes pressing down upon her like a physical force. Then the Korthax representative spoke, his voice like grinding stone. "Pretty words from a species that still kills its own kind over patches of dirt and lines drawn on maps. What can humanity offer the Council that we do not already possess?" Elena had prepared for this question, had known it would come, had practiced her answer until she could say it in her sleep. "We offer ourselves," she said simply, "our strength and our courage and our will to serve. Humanity has never faced a challenge we could not overcome. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed us. And we have emerged stronger each time. Let us prove our worth to you, and you will find no more loyal allies in all the galaxy." The council members exchanged glances that Elena could not interpret. And then the Silver Volante smiled in a way that showed far too many teeth. "Very well. Little humans, we accept your offer of service. You will provide soldiers for our peacekeeping forces. You will fight where we tell you to fight and die where we tell you to die. And in exchange, we will grant you protection and technology and a place at the edge of our civilization." Elena wanted to negotiate, wanted to ask for more, but Captain Webb squeezed her arm in warning, and she understood. This was not a negotiation. This was a test, and the only way to pass was to accept. "Humanity agrees to these terms," she said, and the words tasted like ashes in her mouth even as hope burned bright in her chest. Over the next 20 years, Earth kept its promise with blood and fire and the lives of its children. 2 million human soldiers deployed across council space, fighting wars against enemies whose names they could barely pronounce, dying on worlds so far from home that their families would never see their graves. They fought the Raxian hive swarms on the burning plains of Kara 7. Human soldiers standing back to back as waves of chittering horrors crashed against their lines again and again, fought the machine intelligences of the Void Collective in the cold darkness between galaxies, where ships became coffins and victory meant simply surviving long enough to retreat. They fought rebels and pirates and ancient evils that had slumbered for millennia. And everywhere they went, they earned a reputation that spread across the stars like wildfire. Humans were relentless. The aliens whispered. Humans were adaptable. Humans were terrifying in their refusal to accept defeat. The council watched and took careful note of everything they saw. Elena rose through the ranks of human diplomacy, becoming the voice of her people on the galactic stage, and she began to notice things that troubled her deeply. The council never invited humans to their inner meetings, never shared their most advanced technologies, never treated humanity as anything more than useful tools to be deployed and discarded. When she raised these concerns, she was told to be patient, to trust in the wisdom of beings who had ruled the stars since before her ancestors had climbed down from the trees. And so she waited, because what choice did she have? What choice did any of them have? Elena did not know that far across the galaxy, in the darkness of the Perseus Arm, ancient enemies of the Council had begun to stir. She did not know that humanity's reputation had reached them too, that they feared these new soldiers more than they had feared anything in 1,000 years. She did not know that the Council was already considering how to solve the problem that humanity had become, but she would learn soon enough. And when she did, nothing would ever be the same again. The Cathari Dominion had ruled the Perseus Arm for longer than the Council had existed. Their empire built on conquest and blood, and the bones of species that no longer had names. They were hunters by nature and by choice. Their bodies designed for violence, with claws that could tear through steel and hides that could stop most weapons. And they had never met an enemy they could not eventually defeat until the humans came. 3 Dominion fleets had crossed into Council space over the past decade, testing defenses and probing for weakness as they had always done. And 3 times they had encountered these strange soft creatures from a world called Earth. The first fleet lost half its ships before retreating in confusion, unable to understand how such fragile beings could fight with such ferocity. The second fleet was destroyed entirely when human soldiers boarded their command vessel and fought through corridor after corridor until they reached the bridge itself. The third fleet surrendered after only 6 hours of combat, their admiral choosing shame over the annihilation he knew was coming. The Dominion High Command studied the reports with growing unease and demanded answers from their spies within Council space. What they learned terrified them. These humans bred quickly and adapted faster, learning from every battle and improving their tactics and weapons with each engagement. And their population was growing at a rate that would make them a major power within a century. Something had to be done. And so the Dominion sent envoys to the Council with an offer that would change the fate of World's Ambassador Elena Vasquez learned of the secret meetings 3 weeks after they began, and only because a young Volanthe clerk had developed something like friendship with her over the years. "They are negotiating with our enemies," the clerk whispered in a dark corridor far from watching eyes. "The Dominion wants something, and the Council is considering giving it to them." Elena felt ice form in her stomach as she asked a question she already knew the answer to. What do they want? The clerk's scales rippled with colors of fear and sorrow. "They want to know where your homeworld is." "Ambassador, they want Earth." Elena ran to the Council chambers and demanded an audience. Demanded to know what was being discussed. Demanded the rights that had been promised to humanity when they first agreed to serve. The silver Volanthe looked down at her with those cold ancient eyes and spoke words that shattered everything Elena believed. "You misunderstand your position. Little human, you were never our allies. You were our tools. And a tool does not question the hand that wields it. We have fought for you," Elena shouted, her voice breaking with rage and betrayal. "We have died for you for 20 years. Does that mean nothing?" "It means you have been useful," the Korthax representative rumbled. "But usefulness has limits. And the Dominion offers us something more valuable than your service. They offer us peace." Elena stared at them in horror as understanding dawned. "You are going to give them Earth." The Council did not deny it, did not offer excuses or justifications. Simply watched her with the patience of beings who had made such decisions 1,000 times before. "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few," the silver Volanthe said, and she almost sounded sorry. "Your species will be remembered fondly." Elena was escorted from the chamber by guards who no longer treated her as a diplomat but as a prisoner awaiting execution. She managed to send one message before they took her communications device. A single word to Captain Webb, who had become Admiral Webb in the years since first contact. "Run." The Dominion fleet arrived at Earth on a cold November morning when frost still covered the ground in the northern hemisphere, and children were walking to school and people were drinking coffee and planning their days. 4,000 warships emerged from hyperspace like a wall of death, blocking out the stars themselves with their massive hulls. Earth's defense grid activated immediately. Orbital platforms opening fire with weapons that had been improved and upgraded with every piece of technology humanity could beg or steal from their so-called allies. Admiral Sarah Chun commanded the defense from the station called Guardian Prime, her voice calm and steady as she directed her forces against an enemy that outnumbered them 20 to 1. "All ships concentrate fire on their lead vessels," she ordered. "Make them pay for every kilometer they advance." The battle for Earth lasted 9 days, and those 9 days would become legend among the survivors. Human pilots flew their fighters directly into Dominion capital ships, sacrificing themselves to take out critical systems ground-based. Railguns fired slugs of depleted uranium at velocities that turned them into weapons of mass destruction. Civilian ships, loaded with explosives, rammed enemy vessels in final acts of desperate defiance, and for 9 days. It was almost enough, but the Dominion had numbers and time and the cold patience of a species that had been conquering worlds since before humanity existed. And slowly, inevitably, the defense began to crumble. Guardian Prime fell on the 7th day when a Dominion dreadnought punched through its shields and tore the station apart with concentrated plasma fire. Admiral Chun died at her post, still giving orders as the flames consumed her. The orbital platforms fell one by one after that, each loss opening new gaps in Earth's protection until there was nothing left but the planet itself and the people upon it, who could only watch and wait and pray. On the 9th day, the Dominion began their bombardment. Nuclear fire rained down from the sky like the wrath of angry gods, turning cities into craters and forests into ash and oceans into steam that rose up to choke the atmosphere. 6.2 billion people died in the hours that followed, some instantly vaporized by the heat, others burned alive as firestorms swept across continents, still others suffocating slowly as the air itself became poison. The survivors, those on colonies around other stars, those on stations and ships throughout Council space, those soldiers still fighting wars that no longer mattered, received a transmission from the Council as the last fires burned. Humanity's service to galactic peace is acknowledged, the Silver Volante announced, her voice carrying no emotion at all. Their sacrifice will be remembered with honor. Elena Vasquez listened to those words from a refugee vessel fleeing the burning ruins of Mars, surrounded by crying children and wounded soldiers and people who had lost everything they ever loved. She had tried to warn them, had tried to save them, had failed in every way a person could fail around her. The survivors wept and screamed and prayed to gods who had not answered, but Elena did not weep. Something inside her had died with Earth, burned away in the nuclear fire until only cold hard purpose remained. She found Admiral James Webb in the medical bay, his arm in a sling and his face gray with exhaustion, but his eyes still sharp with the intelligence that had kept him alive through 20 years of impossible wars. "They betrayed us," she said, and her voice was flat and empty like the void between stars. "I know," Webb replied. "They killed our world." "I know." Elena sat down beside him and stared at the wall and saw nothing but fire. "What do we do now?" she asked. Webb was quiet for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his words carried a weight that would echo through history. "We survive," he said. "We rebuild. We remember. And when we are ready, when we are strong enough, we make them pay for what they did." Elena nodded slowly as something new began to grow in the ashes of her heart. Something cold and patient and utterly implacable. "How long?" "As long as it takes," Webb said. 10 years, 20 years, 100 years. It does not matter. Humanity will have its reckoning. And the galaxy will learn what it means to betray us outside the viewport. The stars burned cold and distant and uncaring, but somewhere among those stars, scattered and broken but not destroyed, the remnants of humanity began to gather. In the shadows they had been tools, and they had been victims, and they had been sacrifices on the altar of galactic politics. Now they would become something else, entirely something the Council and the Dominion and all the powers of the galaxy would learn to fear. They would become vengeance. The galaxy forgot about humanity in the years that followed the fall of Earth, dismissing the survivors as scattered refugees who would fade away into the darkness between stars like so many species before them. The Council celebrated their peace with the Dominion, holding grand ceremonies where diplomats praised each other for their wisdom and foresight. The Dominion expanded into the space that had once belonged to human colonies, finding abandoned stations and empty worlds and nothing else. Both powers assumed the human problem had solved itself. that the remnants had simply died in the cold void or settled on some forgotten rock to live out their days in obscurity. They assumed wrong Chancellor Elena Vasquez, for she had taken that title now, elected by the survivors to lead them through the darkness, stood in the command center of Station Prometheus and watched the reports coming in from across the hidden network humanity had built. 30 years had passed since Earth burned. 30 years of silence and secrecy and work that never stopped. The survivors had scattered at first, fleeing council space in every direction, taking whatever ships they could steal or salvage or build from wreckage. They have found each other in the deep void, in the spaces between star systems where no one thought to look, in asteroid fields and rogue planetoids and the dark places where even light seemed afraid to go. And there, in the shadows, they had begun to build. Elena was 73 years old now, her hair white and her face lined with decades of grief and determination. But her eyes still burned with the same cold fire that had ignited on the day she heard the council's final transmission around her. The command center hummed with activity as officers monitored construction, progress and fleet movements, and 1,000 other details that went into rebuilding a civilization from ashes. Admiral Chen Wei approached her with a tablet displaying the latest production numbers, his uniform crisp and his bearing military perfect despite the exhaustion that shadowed his features. He had been a young lieutenant during the fall, one of the soldiers fighting on a distant world. When the news came that Earth was gone now, he commanded the greatest secret humanity had ever kept. Shipyard 7 has completed its quota ahead of schedule, he reported, his voice quiet in the busy room. That brings us to 12,000 vessels ready for deployment, Elena nodded, her expression revealing nothing of the satisfaction she felt. 12,000 ships, each one built in hidden facilities carved into rogue planetoids that drifted between stars, each one crewed by humans who had spent their lives preparing for a war that many thought would never come. They had started with nothing but salvage and stolen technology and the desperate determination of a species with nothing left to lose. The first years had been the hardest, when they were still learning to survive in the void, still gathering the scattered survivors, still mourning the billions who had died. But humans were adaptable. Elena knew humans could survive anything if they had something to fight for. They had the greatest motivation any species could possess: revenge. The scientists had worked miracles in those early years, studying every piece of Council and Dominion technology they could acquire, learning not just how it worked, but how to make it better. Human engineers improved the efficiency of alien power cores by 30% within the first decade. Human weapons designers created railguns that could punch through shields that had stopped everything the galaxy had ever thrown at them. Human programmers wrote navigation software that could plot courses through hyperspace faster and more accurately than systems that had been refined over millennia. The aliens had always underestimated humans, seeing them as primitive and young and limited by their short lifespans and fragile bodies. They had not understood that those same limitations had forced humanity to innovate constantly, to adapt and overcome challenges that older species had simply avoided, to compress centuries of progress into decades through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. What about the special projects? Elena asked, her voice low enough that only Chun could hear. The Admiral's expression darkened with something that might have been anticipation or might have been fear. Project Prometheus is ready for deployment, he said. The weapon works exactly as designed. We tested it on an uninhabited red dwarf in Sector 7 last month. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the early debates about whether to develop such terrible weapons, remembering the arguments that humanity should not become the monsters they sought to destroy. But she also remembered 6.2 2 billion screaming souls, and a world turned to glass and a council that had called it sacrifice. Good, she said simply. The 30 years of silence had not been wasted in other ways. Either human agents had infiltrated council space, posing as members of other species through advanced disguise technology, or simply bribing aliens who cared more for profit than loyalty. They had gathered intelligence on every major power, mapping fleet deployments and defense networks and political relationships with obsessive attention to detail. They knew the council's secrets now, knew the rivalries and resentments that simmered beneath the surface of galactic civilization, knew exactly which pressure points would cause the greatest damage. And they had recruited allies among the species the council had wronged over the millennia. Beings who remembered their own betrayals and had nursed their own dreams of vengeance in the darkness. Lena turned to face the massive display that dominated one wall of the command center, showing a map of known space with human assets marked in blue and enemy positions marked in red. Soon that map would be redrawn in fire and blood. "Chen," she said quietly, "are we ready?" The Admiral considered the question carefully before responding, understanding its weight. "The fleet is ready," he said. "The weapons are ready. The intelligence is solid, but Chancellor, are you certain this is the right time? We could wait longer, build more ships, gather more strength." Elena shook her head slowly. "We have waited 30 years, she said. "Our soldiers have trained their entire lives for this moment. Our children have grown up hearing stories of a world they never knew, asking when we will avenge the dead." She paused, her gaze fixed on the map and the red markers that represented everything she hated. "If we wait longer, we lose who we are," she continued. "We become ghosts haunting the void, bitter remnants who dream of revenge but never act. I will not let that happen." Chun nodded, accepting her judgment as he always had. "Then I will begin final preparations," he said. "The fleet can launch within 72 hours. Elena reached out and placed a hand on his arm, stopping him before he could turn away. "Chun," she said softly, "what we are about to do will change the galaxy forever. There will be no going back. Billions may die before this is over. And history may remember us as monsters, or it may remember us as the species that taught the galaxy what happens when you betray the weak and helpless." Chun replied, "Either way, we will be remembered." He saluted and walked away to begin the work of ending an empire. Elena remained at the viewport, watching the endless darkness that had been humanity's home for 3 decades. She thought about the young woman she had been, standing before the council with hope in her heart and dreams of peaceful coexistence in her mind. That woman had died with Earth, burned away until only purpose remained. Tomorrow she would send a message to the fleet, words she had been composing in her mind for 30 years, words that would launch the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen. Tonight, she simply stood and watched the stars and remembered 6.2 billion faces she would never see again. "Soon," she whispered to the ghost that haunted her, "soon they will know what we have become. Soon they will understand what they created when they chose to betray us." In shipyards hidden throughout the void, 12,000 vessels hummed with power as crews made final preparations in training facilities on a dozen secret bases. Soldiers checked their weapons and said goodbye to loved ones they might never see again. Command centers throughout the human remnant. Officers received their orders and began plotting courses toward targets that had been selected years in advance. The 30 years of silence were ending. The age of retribution was about to begin. The Githari Dominion had ruled the Perseus Arm for 200,000 years, their empire stretching across 10,000 star systems and encompassing hundreds of conquered species who lived and died at the pleasure of their masters. They had grown complacent in their power, secure in the knowledge that no force in the galaxy could challenge their supremacy, they learned otherwise on what their historians would later call the Day of Fire. Chancellor Vasquez stood in the command center of the flagship Remembrance, watching tactical displays as 200 human strike groups emerged from hyperspace simultaneously across Dominion territory. 200 worlds attacked at the exact same moment. Their defenses overwhelmed before they could even understand what was happening. The Dominion had expected war eventually, had even prepared for it in their lazy, confident way. But they had expected it to come from the Council or from some uprising among their slave races. They had not expected it to come from ghosts. First wave objectives achieved. Admiral Chun reported from his position beside her, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Dominion border fortresses are falling across all sectors. Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the displays, showing enemy ships burning in the void. Proceed to Phase 2. She ordered. The human fleet moved with precision that no organic species could match. Their ships piloted by crews who had trained in simulators for years and by AI systems that humans had developed in secret to compensate for their smaller numbers. Where the Dominion relied on overwhelming force and slave soldiers who fought because they feared punishment. Humanity fought with technology and tactics refined over 3 decades of preparation. Dominion commanders screamed orders into communication systems that had already been hacked and disabled, finding their ships isolated and alone against enemies who seemed to know their every move before they made it. The border worlds fell in days, their populations either fleeing or surrendering as human ground forces swept through with terrifying efficiency. Then, the human fleet pushed deeper into Dominion space. And the real horror began. Elena had debated long and hard about how far to take this war. Whether to simply cripple the Dominion military or to pursue something more complete in the end. The memory of Earth burning had made the decision for her. The Dominion had shown no mercy to humanity, had glassed an entire world and called it necessary, had laughed at the screams of 6 billion dying souls. They would receive exactly what they had given. World after world fell as the human advance continued, each victory adding to the legend that was spreading across the galaxy. The humans had returned. The terrified whispers said, and they had come for blood. Dominion High Command mobilized their entire fleet. 8,000 warships gathered from every corner of their empire and positioned them to defend the approaches to their homeworld. It was the largest military force the Dominion had ever assembled, and they were confident it would be enough to stop these upstart humans once and for all. The Battle of the Kethare Threshold lasted 6 hours. Human ships danced through Dominion formations like fire through dry grass, their weapons finding weak points that decades of intelligence gathering had identified. Their pilots pushing their vessels to limits that the aliens had thought impossible. Admiral Chun commanded the assault personally from the bridge of the Remembrance, his orders coming faster than human minds should have been able to process as he orchestrated the destruction of an empire. When it was over, 5,000 Dominion vessels drifted as burning wreckage, and the rest had fled in every direction. Their chain of command shattered and their morale broken beyond repair. The way to the Dominion homeworld was open. Elena gave the order to advance, and the human fleet descended upon the world that had sent the ships to destroy Earth 30 years ago. The Dominion ruling council offered unconditional surrender within hours of the human fleet entering orbit, their ancient arrogance crumbling as they realized what they faced. Elena considered their offer for exactly 10 seconds before rejecting it. They surrendered to us once before, she said, remembering the Third Dominion fleet that had yielded rather than face human soldiers. And then they came for our world anyway. There will be no surrender this time. Instead, she activated Project Prometheus. The weapon was elegant in its horror, a device that could reach into the heart of a star and disrupt its fusion process for a controlled period of time. The Dominion homeworld watched in absolute terror as their sun flickered and died, its light fading from yellow to orange to a deep angry red over the course of 3 minutes. Temperature on the planet's surface dropped 40 degrees in those 3 minutes. Ice forming on windows and breath turning to frost in the air, and then, just as suddenly, the sun reignited and returned to normal. Eli's face appeared on every screen on the planet, broadcast on frequencies that could not be blocked or jammed. "That was a demonstration," she said, her voice cold and hard as the void itself. "We could have let your star die and watched your world freeze. We could have done to you what you did to Earth." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Instead, we offer you a choice. Disband your military, free your slave races, accept human oversight of your government, and you may live, refuse, and we will return. And next time, there will be no demonstration." The Dominion agreed to every demand within the hour. News of their defeat spread across the galaxy at the speed of light, and with it spread terror among those who had thought themselves safe from human vengeance. The Council received the reports with growing panic as they realized what was coming for them next. Emergency sessions were called. Diplomatic envoys were dispatched, and the 12 species that had ruled the Orion Arm for 50,000 years began to beg for mercy from the ghost they had created. Elena received their envoys aboard the Remembrance, now orbiting the conquered Dominion homeworld, and she listened to their offers of reparations and apologies, and promises of eternal friendship with a chant and with a chanjip, with a promises of eternal friendship with a diand face that showed nothing at all. "You sold our world to our executioners," she said when they had finished their pathetic pleas. "You watched 6 billion people die and called it sacrifice. And now you come to me with words of peace?" The senior envoy, a Volante, whose scales had faded to gray with age, prostrated himself before her. "We were wrong," he said. "We see that now. We will give you anything you want. Reparations beyond measure, technology, territory, whatever you desire." Elena smiled, and there was no warmth in it at all. "What I desire," she said quietly, "is to stand in the grand chamber where I once begged for humanity's place among the stars. What I desire is to look upon the thrones of those who betrayed us and know that justice has been done." She leaned forward, her eyes burning with 30 years of cold fury. "What I desire is for the galaxy to understand that there are some prices too high to pay, some betrayals too great to forgive." The envoy trembled and tried to speak, but Elena cut him off with a gesture. "Go back to your masters," she commanded. "Tell them to gather their fleets and prepare their defenses. Tell them that humanity is coming, and tell them that we remember everything." She activated the ship's communication system and broadcast a message across every frequency in known space. A message that would be heard by every species in the galaxy. 30 years ago, the Galactic Council sold Earth to the Dominion in exchange for peace, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of 6 billion souls. "They called our dead a sacrifice. They called our children tools. They watched our world burn and offered us nothing but empty words." She paused as images of Earth's destruction played across screens throughout the galaxy. The historical record that humanity had preserved and now shared with everyone. "The Dominion has been defeated," she continued. "Their empire exists only because we allow it. And now we turn our attention to those who made their crimes possible." The final image showed the council chamber. The 12 thrones where beings who thought themselves gods had decided humanity's fate. "We are coming," Elena said simply. "And we remember." Throughout council space, panic spread like wildfire as the meaning of her words became clear. The age of council supremacy was ending. The age of human reckoning had begun. The council had 50,000 years to prepare for this moment. 50,000 years of accumulated power and technology, and the combined might of 12 spacefaring civilizations they gathered everything they had at the Nexus, the administrative heart of their empire, determined to make a stand that would break the human advance once and for all. 4 million warships assembled in the space around that ancient station, drawing vessels from every corner of Council territory, leaving worlds undefended rather than face the humans with anything less than overwhelming force. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history, a wall of metal and fire that stretched across millions of kilometers of space, crewed by trillions of beings who believed they were fighting for their survival, and they were right. Though not in the way they imagined. Chancellor Vasquez stood on the bridge of the remembrance as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus system. 12,000 ships against 4 million. The Council admirals saw those numbers and allowed themselves to hope, allowed themselves to believe that mathematics would save them where diplomacy had failed. They did not understand what they faced. "All ships report ready," Admiral Chun announced, his voice calm despite the impossible odds displayed on every tactical screen. "Awaiting your orders, Chancellor." Elena looked at the swarm of enemy vessels before her. Thinking about all the years that had led to this moment, she thought about the young woman who had stood before the Council. With hope in her heart, she thought about the billions who had died because she had trusted beings who saw humanity as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded. She thought about the children who had grown up in hidden stations throughout the void, learning to fight before they learned to read, knowing they might never see the war they were training for. "Signal all ships," she said quietly. "Operation Final Reckoning is go." The Battle of the Nexus would become the most studied military engagement in galactic history, analyzed by strategists for thousands of years afterward as they tried to understand how so few had defeated so many. The human fleet did not attack in a conventional formation, did not try to match strength against strength or trade fire in the way the Council expected. Instead, they became ghosts. Human ships pushed their engines past every safety limit, achieving accelerations that would have killed any crew not prepared for the punishment. Moving so fast that targeting systems could not track them, they struck in waves, appearing from unexpected angles, firing and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Using tactics that seemed more like choreography than combat, Council vessels tried to pursue, only to find themselves chasing shadows, while human weapons tore into their flanks from directions they had not expected. The Lanthi command ship was the first to fall, its shields overwhelmed by concentrated fire from a dozen human vessels that appeared from nowhere and vanished. Just as quickly, the Korthax dreadnoughts followed, their stone-like hulls cracking under impacts from railgun rounds, traveling at relativistic velocities. The Mindari telepaths tried to coordinate their forces through their mental network, only to find that network filled with static and screams as human electronic warfare systems tore it apart, one by one. The great powers of the Council fell. Human boarding parties crashed into enemy vessels, their soldiers wearing power armor that made them unstoppable forces of destruction, fighting through corridors filled with alien defenders who had never faced anything like them. Admiral Chun directed the battle like a conductor leading an orchestra of death, his orders coming faster than the enemy could react, exploiting weaknesses that 30 years of intelligence gathering had revealed. And through it all, Elena watched with eyes that showed no emotion at all. Volanthi flagship destroyed. A tactical officer reported. Korthax formation breaking. Another announced. Mindari vessels are retreating one by one. The updates came, each one another nail in the coffin of an empire that had ruled the stars for longer than humanity had existed. 11 hours after the battle began, it was over. The Council coalition fleet, 4 million vessels, the combined might of 12 civilizations, had been reduced to debris and retreating survivors. Human losses were heavy by their standards. Nearly 3,000 ships destroyed, Hundreds of thousands of lives lost, but against an enemy that had outnumbered them more than 300 to 1. It was a victory beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Nexus itself fell shortly afterward, its defenders surrendering rather than face the soldiers who had destroyed the greatest fleet in history. Elena walked through the shattered halls of the station where she had once begged for humanity's place among the stars, stepping over debris and past cowering aliens who no longer had the power to threaten anyone. The Grand Chamber was damaged but intact, its crystal dome cracked and its lights flickering, but still standing as a monument to what the Council had been. The 12 thrones stood empty, their occupants having fled hours before. When it became clear that the battle was lost, Elena climbed the steps to the central platform where she had once stood as a supplicant and looked out at the destruction she had wrought. They ran, Chun said, joining her on the platform, his armor scarred from combat and his face gray with exhaustion. Our intelligence suggests they scattered to hidden locations throughout their territories. Let them run, Elena replied, her voice echoing in the empty chamber. Their empires are finished. Their fleets are destroyed. They will spend the rest of their lives as refugees, just as we did. She turned to face the Admiral, the man who had been with her since the beginning, who had helped transform scattered survivors into the most feared force in the galaxy. It is over, she said simply. Chan nodded slowly, but there was a question in his eyes. What happens now? He asked. We have destroyed our enemies, conquered their territories, broken their power forever. But what do we do with our victory? Elena was quiet for a long moment, thinking about that question. She had spent 30 years dreaming of this moment, planning for it, living for it. She had never really thought about what came after. Will you not become them? She said finally. We do not exterminate their peoples or enslave their worlds. We are better than that. We have to be better than that. She walked to one of the empty thrones and placed her hand upon it, feeling the cold metal that has supported beings who thought themselves gods. We will dismantle their empires, she continued. Scatter their fleets, reduce their powers to shadows of what they were. They will never again have the strength to threaten anyone. But we will not commit genocide, she added firmly. We will not become the monsters they feared we would be. Humanity's vengeance is complete. Now we must build something better from the ashes. Chun accepted this with the same quiet loyalty he had shown throughout the war. And you, Chancellor? He asked. What will you do now? Elena smiled, and for the first time in 30 years, there was something almost like peace in her eyes. I will go home, she said softly. Earth is being healed. Our scientists say the atmosphere will be breathable again within a decade. The surface will support life within 20 years. She paused, looking up through the cracked dome at the stars beyond. I want to see it, she whispered. I want to stand on the soil of my homeworld again, even if it is nothing but ash and glass. I want to see the sky that 6 billion people looked up at before they died. 1 year later, a monument was completed in orbit above the scarred but slowly healing Earth. It was a simple structure, a ring of black stone floating in the void, bearing the names of every person who had died when the Dominion came. 6.2 billion names carved in letters, so small that it would take years to read them all beneath the names. In letters large enough to be seen from the surface below, a single phrase was written in every language humanity had ever spoken. We remember. We returned. We remain. Elena stood at the viewing platform as the monument was unveiled, surrounded by the survivors who had followed her through 30 years of darkness, and War Admiral Chun was beside her as always, older now and tired, but still standing straight in his dress uniform. Do you think the galaxy will ever forgive us? He asked quietly, watching the sun rise over the wounded Earth below. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. That was never the point, she said, her voice soft but certain. The point was making sure they never forget. She watched as light fell upon the monument, illuminating the names of the dead for the first time. We did not fight for forgiveness, she continued. We did not conquer for power. We did what we did so that the galaxy would understand one simple truth. She turned to face Chun, and her eyes held the fire that had burned in them since the day Earth died. Humanity is not a species to be used and discarded, she said. We are not tools or sacrifices or acceptable losses. We are a people who remember our dead and honor their memory. She looked back at Earth, at the world that was slowly returning to life after 3 decades of death. And now the galaxy knows what happens when you betray us, she finished simply. Now they understand the price of our trust and the cost of our vengeance. Below them, on the surface of a world that had been murdered and reborn, the first green shoots were beginning to push through. The ash life was returning to Earth, and in the halls of power throughout the galaxy, where once great empires had schemed and plotted against the young species from